Hello and welcome to this KidsMatter webinar, KidsMatter Ways Your Way. This webinar is part of a series of webinars, so some really like to welcome back those people who've been to other of our KidsMatter webinars, and also a really warm welcome to those people who've come to this webinar as their first one. So we're really glad to have you here. Just a little bit to let you know about how to navigate around the red backspace that we're in now, the webinar space. So some of you might have noticed that it wasn't any sound. That was something that happened because of the setup of the webinar. And if at any time there's some issues around sound, someone will support you with that, or you can just see the notification that's coming up on the screen. The other thing that you can do is participate in the chat, and I can see a lot of you really involved in talking with each other in the chat. So we'll be responding to some of your comments and questions, so feel free to pop them in there. The other thing that will happen, and you might like to get organised now, is over in the bottom right-hand corner is a little white folder. You can access some of the documents from tonight's webinar from in there, and you might want to open that now and have them sitting there ready. So there'll be a transcript for a podcast that we'll be listening to, and also some other documents that you might like to have open, ready and waiting. The other thing that you can do is, if you're not interested in the chat and you want to participate in other ways with our polls or with the discussion blog, you can minimise the chat and just participate or just listen and participate that way. So that's all I think I need to let you know about. I'm Sarah Richardson. I'm a KidsMatter facilitator and part of the KidsMatter team, and I'll be supporting and participating in this webinar tonight with you. Just a little bit about KidsMatter. KidsMatter is a national mental health initiative funded by the Department of Health, and working for Early Childhood Australia, our partners are Beyond Blue and the Australian Psychological Society. So what we are hoping is that you'll be challenged, inspired, and supported to explore reconciliation, and also meaningfully embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ways of knowing, doing, being in your place by using and accessing and understanding a little bit more about the KidsMatter resources that we've got. So you'll see that you can learn many ways. We'll acknowledge, consider and celebrate. We'll have time to be, think, do and feel, and we'll also grow as we connect, yarn and celebrate the KidsMatter resources. So to get started, I'd like to acknowledge the countries that we're all meeting on today, and we'll hear from an acknowledgement that Torquay Kids, a childcare centre from Queensland, use to acknowledge country. And while we're doing that, I'd really encourage you to pay respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that you're working, living and playing on. So Torquay Kids acknowledges the traditional custodians of our land and respect those that walked before us, those that walk with us now and those that walk in the future. I pay my deep respect to the first people of this land who tended and cared for the earth beneath us for many years. I say thank you to them, the elders both past and present, and hope that we can in turn pass on to our young people respect for the land on which we play and learn, and to move forward into the future as one Australia altogether. I'm always really interested to hear and experience acknowledgements by other people. For me, doing an acknowledgement is never a chore. It's never one of those things that just becomes part of the housekeeping. For me, it's an act of reconciliation, a public act, where I can pay respects to elders and Aboriginal peoples who were here before me. It's also acknowledging a powerful connection to the land and the seas, but also the strength and culture of Aboriginal peoples, both now and into the future. It's really important also for me that I am doing an acknowledgement of country. It is not my place to do a welcome. Only elders who are recognised by their community can have that responsibility. So it'll be really interesting to hear, maybe in the chat you can add, some ideas about what things you do to acknowledge, consider and celebrate Australia's First Nations peoples, and how you might acknowledge the country that you work with with your team, with your families, and also with your children. So the other thing that I really want to talk about just before we get into the webinar is that sometimes in this space we can feel a bit uncomfortable, we can feel unsure, we can feel a bit anxious. Sometimes we can feel angry and frustrated, we can feel sad, and it can be a bit overwhelming. So I think this is a really important reminder that we need to take care of ourselves, we need to support each other, and we need to focus on our strengths and always ask ourselves, is this a culturally safe place? So that's enough from me, and I'd really like to introduce Rita to you now. Rita's going to take us through some of the KidsMatter ways.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello, Rita.
Thanks for the welcome, and welcome everyone as well to this webinar. And I can see from the chat that you are not only from all over Australia, but from other parts of the world as well, and mainly Europe, Asia, Australia and New Zealand. And there's a great diversity out there in early childhood services, and I think that's one of the really important things to think about as we're working through all this material that we're going to talk about. Some of the questions that have come up as well about what people want to know a common one is that people want to embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture rather than just be tokenistic, rather than just wait for NAIDOC Day. And also people want to know, how do they do this work when they don't have any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children at their service? So tonight, hopefully we'll answer some of those questions, but mainly what I'm giving you tonight is some keys to increase your understanding, and some keys to open doorways to further learning. So tonight we're going to talk about learn a bit more about what is reconciliation, look at the link between mental health and reconciliation, and explore the KidsMatter ways as a way of getting into action. Before we start, however, I really do want to thank the team who helped put this webinar together. I'm certainly not an expert in this area, and I relied very much on my colleague Sarah Richardson, who's our moderator tonight and who'll be doing some of the presenting with me, and also Tracy Simpson, who actually headed up the team that developed KidsMatter Ways and was an invaluable resource and support in developing this webinar. And finally to Elsa Perez, who designed our beautiful slides that we're going to see. And also a big thank you to the people behind, the KidsMatter people behind the scenes who you'll see on chat and we'll be posting on Facebook and Twitter, so thank you to those as well. So all of us here involved with this webinar, we're all non-Aboriginal women talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues and resources. And I want to be really clear, we're not speaking for Aboriginal people. However, we will be hearing Aboriginal voices both directly and indirectly through the webinar. So let's begin by finding out a little bit more about each other, and we'll take a poll, and the question is, how many identified Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families are at your service? So there we go. And I'm using the word identified purposefully because it could be likely that you could have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families at your service who haven't identified themselves. And you might also like to take a moment in the chat to think about why that might be so. Why wouldn't Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families identify themselves?
Rita, I might just jump in here too. I've got a story about an educator who was working at a childcare centre who didn't identify and had been working at the centre for quite a long time. When some staff went to a reconciliation action planning workshop and came back really excited and really motivated to engage in reconciliation in their community, this was only then when that person felt safe to actually identify as an Aboriginal person.
Yeah, and in the chat I can see that's the sort of things that people are suggesting, that it's not safe, stigma, discrimination, and also stereotyping. In the past it was thought, of course incorrectly, that Aboriginal children were less intelligent than non-Aboriginal children, and therefore, you know, less was offered and less was expected, and so families possibly don't want that sort of stereotyping as much as the stigma and and just the lack of feeling safe. So we can see that a lot of our, about half of the participants here have got no Aboriginal families, and then about 30% have got a few, and only 7% have many, and 2% have all. So welcome to all those Indigenous services that are participating today. But we can see there's not many of those sorts of services.
Sorry, we might just stop the poll now too, Rita, but you can, you can keep talking.
Yeah. Yeah. So so in Australia it's very common that we don't actually meet Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, or particularly Aboriginal people. And I think there was a survey a while ago that showed that only one in 3 Australians could identify that they'd met an Aboriginal person in their lifetime, and that's a fairly telling sort of statistic. But anyway, let's go on to talk about, what we can do to change this. I think that's the main key here to our webinar. And so we're going to start by talking about reconciliation. And why am I starting with reconciliation? Why aren't I just diving into the resources? Well, to really meaningfully embed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and ways of knowing, being and doing, we actually need to understand why this is so important. And this is a journey that we at KidsMatter have been on, a very strong learning curve around this over the last few years. And it's also really helpful to have a framework that will support us in our planning. Embedding Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and ways, it's not something you do just once. It's actually a lifelong journey, and it needs to be an everyday part of your service. Reconciliation Australia is an organisation that is independent, not-for-profit, national, and their vision is for everyone to wake to a reconciled, just and equitable Australia. And this is what they say about reconciliation. Reconciliation is about building better relationships between the wider Australian community and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for the benefit of all Australians. We need more people talking about the issues and coming up with innovative ideas and actions that make a difference. And here's another voice from Aboriginal author Max Dalaman Harrison, who comes from the south coast of New South Wales, and he's from the Yuin Nation. And this is what he wrote about reconciliation. There has never been a partnership between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of this land in the first place. So I take this word reconciliation and I use it to reconcile people back to Mother Earth so they can walk this land together and heal one another. Because she's the one that gives birth to everything we see around us, everything we need to survive. So what comes up for you when you hear these two statements? You might want to pop some of your ideas in the chat. When I read these two and hear these two statements, for me they feel and sound quite different, but I can see that they are both about getting into action to make things better. So reconciliation is about building better relationships and healing the past. It's about removing discrimination and stigma for everyone's benefit. One of the things I've learned and understood recently is that everyone in Australia, to have good mental health for all of us, we need all people in Australia to flourish. It's not mentally healthy for anybody if there's parts of our society that aren't flourishing. So that's why reconciliation is going to benefit all Australians. And as I said, it's not just a good idea, it's not just words. It means getting into action. And we can get into action around reconciliation as individuals, personally, as an organisation, for example, at your early childhood education and care service, or in the broader community. Now, it's well known that when we make a record of our goals and our plans, when we write them down or create images of them in some way, we're much more likely to achieve them. And so, with reconciliation, this process is called a reconciliation action plan. I noticed some people are making some comments about the definitions of reconciliation around healing the past, taking time to listen and learn, and that we're all the same. We all come from Mother Earth. So you can see here, actually I just want to point out, because it's relevant to some things we're going to talk about later, on this particular slide comes from Narragansett, and you can see the images of the key concepts that are important to reconciliation. So just while I'm speaking, take a look at those images as well. So here's what Reconciliation Australia says about reconciliation action plans. They say, Reconciliation Action Plans, or RAPs for short, provide a framework for organisations to realise their vision for reconciliation. RAPs are practical plans of action built on relationships, respect and opportunities. They create social change and economic opportunities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. And there's a special place on the Reconciliation Australia website that supports developing the Reconciliation Action Plan, and that is this page called Narragansett. And this word comes from the language of the Ngunnawal people, and it means peace, alive, well-being and coming together. And you can sign up on that page and have access to a program that will help you develop and create your own unique reconciliation action plan. You know, we hear a lot about the pain and the intergenerational trauma of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, and we certainly need to know about this. And especially many of us are working with these families and children every day. But we also need to hear about the healthy and strong Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and ways that is alive and well today. And I've certainly learnt more about that myself just in the preparation of this webinar. So reconciliation in action is a way not only to improve outcomes for those in need, but to promote and strengthen the existing proud and rich Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture that is alive and well today. And that's just as important as the work that we're doing with the families in need. So let's take a look now about the link between mental health and reconciliation, because after all, KidsMatter is a mental health initiative. So in component 1 of KidsMatter, we learnt that being part of a community, feeling safe and included, and having a sense of belonging is one of the strongest protective factors to improve and maintain good mental health and well-being. But I want to give you some examples of when this isn't happening. What happens when this isn't the case, when there isn't a strong sense of community? So in 2001, Australian Naomi Priest and her colleagues completed a review of international research on racism. And what they found was that there were strong links between self-reported racism and poor mental health, which includes depression, anxiety and psychological distress, and also links to poor physical health and increased substance use and abuse. And then Naomi did a further study of young Aboriginal people aged 16 to 20 years living at the top end of the Northern Territory. And what they found, what Naomi and her team found, was that the experience of racism was associated with anxiety, depression, suicide risk and overall poor mental health. And not only is this really a terrible outcome for these young people, but it's also those years are often the time when Australian Aboriginal people are going to become parents, and so that flows onto their children. And in another study, it was actually found that pregnant mothers who were worried about experiencing racism had worse outcomes for their children in both physical and mental health and well-being. So racism is just one of the risk factors that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families face on a daily basis. And reconciliation and reconciliation action plans are powerful ways to increase protective factors that improve outcomes. So your reconciliation action plan will create protective factors for all the families and children who are already at your service, but will also make your service more accessible to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families into the future. Aboriginal families feel much more welcome when they can see in a service signs of their culture and signs of them being recognised. So we've looked very briefly at the what, why and how of reconciliation and reconciliation action plans. So let's look at the KidsMatter Ways resources as a way of getting into action. So before we do that, let's have a poll and let's see how much do you already include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and perspectives at your service. So while we're doing that poll, I'll share that Louise is saying that their RAP gave them a starting point, and now they're feeling much more confident about incorporating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture in their service. Oh, and Tammy says that in her service the children acknowledge country every day, and they meet weekly to research and consider ways of implementing reconciliation. Wow, that's fantastic. Yes, Sarah, you're going to say something.
I was thinking when you were talking, Rita, about cultural safety, you know, how you were saying if families feel comfortable because they can see themselves there, it's also about, you know, asking yourself those questions about how safe is this place for Aboriginal people. So putting up a flag might be part of that process.
I'll talk a little bit more about cultural safety a bit further along in the webinar as well. So we've got nobody's owned up to not at all. I've never thought about it, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
We've got a few not at all because they don't have any families, and certainly, you know, at times when I was teaching preschool, I was in that category. We've got a little bit, a moderate amount, and a lot. And some not at alls don't know where to start, and that's really great because after today you'll have a starting point, which is fantastic. Yeah.
So we might stop the poll.
Yep.
And move on. Yeah, Rita, that the connection to land and connection to country is a really critical component of mental health and wellbeing, and that's something that we've got.
But in early childhood pedagogy, that tricky word, there is something called place-based learning, which is very much learning about the land and the place that you're at. And that's actually, you know, I'll say a Western mind concept. So connecting to the land is important for all of us, but particularly important to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So let's have a look now how to start or how to keep going. So let's look at the KidsMatter Ways resources. So we've got a number of resources, and the reason they're there is that for two reasons. One is that we want to make mental health messages and wellbeing messages more accessible to everyone. And we wanted to bring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and ways of doing to the resources that we already had and to the experience for those who are involved with KidsMatter. So you can see we've got action charts, Yarning Up podcasts, KidsMatter Ways symbols, and ebook learning on country. And that top row of resources is what we call the KidsMatter Ways resources. But at the bottom, we've also got on the website blog posts, which is the early childhood part of KidsMatter blog posts. We've got a resource portal, and we've got information sheets. And also in the KidsMatter primary section, there's some fantastic animations of stories. So I encourage you to dive into those as well. But today we're going to look at, I wanted to say a little bit more about how these resources were developed. They were developed very respectfully, where culture was acknowledged and considered and celebrated. SNAKE, the Secretariat of National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare, worked in partnership with KidsMatter, and we also had a generous input from community members and early childhood staff across Australia, and we shaped and reshaped this work to make it really fit as many people's needs as we could. So let's start by looking at the action charts. And so there's 16 action charts, and some of you may have been using those. I'm just looking at the chat to see if anyone's talking about anything they're doing with action charts. And they're clustered in groups of 4 that link to the 4 components of KidsMatter. And you can see on this image of the action chart, and along the top there's a key message. So in this one, which is linked to component 2, it says educators, families and children work together for children's social and emotional learning. And then at the bottom, there's another message, and I'll have to look at my bigger copy here, that says social emotional skill development involves relationships, knowledge and support. Now along both sides you'll see some symbols and some words underneath them. Those symbols belong to 8 Ways, which is an Aboriginal pedagogy from Western New South Wales, and I'm going to say more about those a bit later. So let's just get back to that front of that chart now. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that you could actually make these more your own. It wasn't just something you printed off and go, okay, what do we do with this? So there are templates where you can put your own photos in place of the photo that you see there, and you can also put your own message along the bottom. So you might want to change that message to say at Little Kids Corner, we support our children in social emotional skills through relationships. So you might want to actually personalise that message a little bit yourself. But more importantly, you can put that into language. You can put that into Aboriginal language or any other language of the people who are at your service. So that's one way of making these charts much more accessible to everyone. So, and there's actually there's a blog post called How to Use Action Charts, so that'll be in your resources as well. And that also tells you how to change the photos and how to change the text if you're not sure how to do that. So on the back of the action chart, let's see the other side now. Thanks, Sarah. So each action chart is divided into 4 sections. So one is called Many Ways, Knowing, Being and Doing, Learning That, Many Ways of Doing and Connecting to Community. And in those sections there are great suggestions for further learning or for getting into action, so for reflective discussions with staff. So on this one, one of them is time is the key to building relationships. So that might encourage you to reflect on, you know, if a relationship's not working with a family or a child, am I spending enough time today with that family or child, or have I spent enough time over days and weeks with that family and child to build the relationship? So an example of the learning maps might be create photo stories about emotions for children. Hey, what a great idea. Let's do that at our service. Many ways of doing. You might have adults really trying to get to know each other. Often when services start KidsMatter, their first work is not actually with the children, it's with the adults, with the educators, or often with the educators, with each other, because they've already put a lot of attention on the children and the families. And in the section community, connecting to community, it says adults help children to keep calm. You might read that and go, yeah, that's great, but we actually need to know more about how to do that. So on the back of each action chart is these ideas that will trigger you into doing things, trigger you into action. And they're a great resource for ideas. Those services who are implementing KidsMatter and want to have some more ideas about what they can do with in some of their action plans, would be well placed to have a look at the back of the action charts that relate to the component that you're working on, or any component, any action chart that you think is relevant, and that will give you some great ideas as well. Sarah, do you want to say a couple of words about how people use the action charts?
Free trial? Yeah. Sure. There's just a couple of things I've been thinking of. One is a story of a service that I've been working with who use the action charts as a professional learning tool, and in the process of determining what photo or what image might go in the middle and what words might go in there, there's all manner of conversations and discussions and, you know, professional dialogue that happens between services, between educators, to work out even what might go in there. So the service that I'm working with is going to use the action charts as professional learning, but in the process of determining what the words are and what the images are is actually as important as what you end up with. And the other thing I was thinking about, which is not necessarily related to the action charts, but I'm picking up on some of the things in the chat, is the idea that connecting to community is so fundamentally important to everything we do. And people are asking, I don't know how to start. We know relationships are really important, and and relationships with community, getting to know people, seeking out people and asking people from your local community is just so fundamentally important to this whole process as well. So not just trying to go it alone, but really connecting and establishing those relationships and finding out, asking questions.
And I've noticed in the chat too, we've got ideas, you know, displaying the flags every day, planting Indigenous food. So there's all sorts of roundabout ways, in a way, that you can also start conversations with all families about this. Right.
Yeah. Denise has just said that's really important about asking permission, and, you know, even finding out who you have to ask permission from, you know, not just taking the language and using it on an action chart, for example, but finding out what the language is, finding out what the right words are, finding out from the right people whether you can use that language is a really important part of the whole process. Anyway, we can talk about that for a long time, Rita.
We can, and thanks for mentioning that, Sarah. And you'll find some more information about that in our Learning on Country, sorry, just slipped my mind for a moment, in our Learning on Country book, which I'm going to talk about in a while. At the moment, I just want to say a little bit about the 8 ways images that you see, symbols that you see on our action charts. Now, they're used with permission, so I'll just, if you haven't heard about 8 ways, it could seem rather strange and mysterious, and it certainly was to me, and it's taken me quite a long time to understand what they're about. 8 ways is a pedagogy framework, so it's a framework of teaching practices. It allows teachers to include Aboriginal perspectives by using Aboriginal learning techniques, and it was developed in Western New South Wales. The purpose of the 8 ways is to model a framework of Aboriginal ways of learning that shares a common ground with the best teaching practices internationally. So as you're looking, and they focus rather on the how, more on the how rather than the what. And if you're looking at those ways of doing things and ways of learning, you're probably seeing that we already do many of those. Best practice in early childhood services, we are already doing those as well. And if we're not, we can do them some more. So 8 ways is also a great thing to find out more about, and there will be some ways to do that, some links about ways to do that in our resources. But even if you don't know what the symbols mean, and I do encourage you to learn more, what they do remind us is that there's always different ways of learning and different ways of doing, and if one way isn't working, we do need to find another way. And the symbols always remind me to be flexible and open to new ways. And so they just keep my mind open, which is a fantastic way to approach our work. And so we've talked about symbols twice. I just pointed out the symbols on the Narragunawali page that I showed you earlier, and we've looked at the 8-way symbols. And now we're going to have a look at what our KidsMatter ways symbols, and Sarah's going to explain how we got those and what they are.
Thanks, Rita. So the story about the KidsMatter ways symbols, do you remember, Rita, we had a session with Melissa from Western New South Wales in Brisbane, and Melissa taught us about the 8 ways, their connections, their meanings. I need to click through so you can see them. And then what? So she shared her knowledge about the 8 ways with us, and then at the end, Melissa asked us all to create a message stick, and I've got mine here because I carry it with me all the time. It was really, and you won't be able to see it, but we all created a message stick where Melissa asked us to take the messages of KidsMatter and use symbols to explain them on a message stick that we could give to someone else. And I guess that was the beginnings of how our KidsMatter ways came about. And then a small group of us worked together to have conversations and bring our collective ideas all together. And so that's where the KidsMatter way symbols came from. Is that's how you remember it, Rita? Yep. The process? Yeah. So in coming together with the 8 ways, we developed these symbols. So the first one on your screen there is acknowledge, consider, and celebrate. So, and these are the key and fundamental messages of KidsMatter that we wanted to share. The next one is about conversations, which is what we're doing today. It's in the middle of that image is a what's it called? A flannel flower, which is a really resilient, strong, native flower and beautiful. And around that are different conversations, different perspectives, different ways of connecting. We've already talked today about safety and how important it is to feel safe, be safe, and make sure that people are safe. Connecting is the other thing we're doing, and there's a whole range of different ways to connect. The other one is learning many ways, and recognizing that there are a whole range of different ways that we can learn and know and explore things. And you can see there's a lot of movement and the idea of things growing and changing and evolving, and that's kind of, I guess, one of the really powerful things about all of this for me is that this is not ever something that you just know. You always continually learning and growing and like that next image says, you know, transforming even. And then the last one is it's really about being in the moment and recognizing and tapping into our feelings as well as our thoughts. And that probably for me, when we did this process, one of the biggest things that I discovered was that I can't always describe the experience in words. Sometimes it's just what it feels like, and I can't put things into words, and it's really hard to explain. So perhaps the symbols can help me do that.
Mm. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah.
The other exciting is that we're revisiting them now, all of us as a whole staff team. Sorry, did you want to say something, Rita? Yeah, so we because it was a small group of us that developed these KidsMatter ways symbols, some people felt disconnected from them. Some people in our KidsMatter team felt disconnected from them. So we're actually going back and doing a whole lot of work, and it's really exciting. Just today, each of us have taken one of those symbols because they all will have different meanings to different people. But each of us have taken one from our team and written a blog post. So you can go onto to our Shared Thinking blog and have a look at what some of the team understand each of those symbols to mean and the words that go with them. And we would love to hear your views and your ideas as well. So later on, pop on over to our blog and have a look at how we've been evolving them as well and understanding them and making meaning of them.
Thanks, Sarah. And once again, for me, you know, these symbols help me sort of get out of my left linear brain and start to encourage me to think, you know, more broadly and in different ways. And yeah, the KidsMatter Way symbols are really the heart of what we really value in KidsMatter early childhood. So thanks for that.
And the other thing is that we would really encourage you to develop your own symbols. Yeah. These aren't Aboriginal symbols, these are our symbols, but they are informed and inspired, and we developed them because of the wisdom that Melissa shared with us.
And when Sarah and I were talking about this earlier, you know, we were saying, wouldn't it be great if a service, instead of having their philosophy in a list of words, you know, had these symbols to capture what their service philosophy is. And you know and the thing about visuals too is it unlocks other parts of the brain and other parts of understanding that are non-verbal and are equally as important as the verbal.
Yeah, so, and I can just see from the chat there, sorry Rita, just one more thing, someone's, you know, that feeling of being afraid of offending and you know, it often comes up around this kind, you know, around these kind of things. So Helen's saying that she's afraid of offending, or, you know, that the symbols aren't appropriate and relevant. And I think what you have to do is, that's why those connections are so important. You have to find out, you have to ask.
And we certainly, our team certainly understands that fear, you know, because I had quite a lot of it when I was preparing for this webinar, going, oh, am I going to say the right thing, you know. So find a good mentor, you know. connect with the KidsMatter team. Sign up for KidsMatter and connect with the KidsMatter team. But find a mentor, find someone in your community to talk to about what you want to do and how you can move forward. It's a really important thing. So I'm just aware of the time now. So let's look at another one of our key resources, which is the podcast, and we call those Yarning Up KidsMatter. And there's 8 series of 10 podcasts, which is 80 podcasts, so there's a lot there. They're both Indigenous and non-Indigenous voices from all around Australia, yarning about kids matter, early childhood, mental health, education, culture, history, families, lots of things. And we use the Aboriginal term yarning because it's a way of capturing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's stories and the descriptions of how they see and experience things. And yarning implies a free-flowing, open-ended conversation that moves according to its own internal logic and the needs of the people who are yarning. And if you want to find out more about yarning, you can go to our blog post called Get Ready, Get Set, Yarn Up. But I'm going to stop talking for a while. We're going to hear about a podcast now. It goes for about 3 minutes. If you can't hear the audio, you can download the transcript here. If you've called in on the phone, you should be able to hear it through your computer if you turn up the sound on your computer. And at the end of the podcast, we'll just sit and reflect for a moment. And we've used the KidsMatter symbol for conversation to give ourselves a framework for the experience of listening to this yarn. And so we'll be listening and hearing and talking in the chat or listening to Gabby talking to us, sharing stories, yarning up and learning. So let's do all of that while we listen to Gabby talking about connecting with Aboriginal community.
In this episode, Gabby, an Aboriginal educator from South Australia, yarns with Sarah about connecting with Aboriginal community. It's everybody's job.
It needs to be every member of staff, so it's not the job of one person alone. I mean, I'm the Aboriginal education teacher here. It's not my role to go and talk on behalf of a teacher. That teacher needs to make contact and establish a relationship with those families of the children that they have in their class as well. Yeah. And it becomes a whole school process. It's not the responsibility of one person. Yeah. And I really truly believe that without that approach, the community won't come to us. The community will avoid us, and we will make phone calls and they won't answer because we are not valued to them, because we don't make the connections with them. Yeah. And if it's only one person, then they view the other members of our staff as in a negative sense. They don't value the relationship. They dismiss them really quickly. Yes. And that's why I think it's really important that everybody, it becomes a whole school process where all staff members need to be available and need to make those contacts. Yeah. And there's, really there isn't anything to be afraid of. There seems to be a bit of a perception that, I don't know if I could do that. Yeah. I mean, we're talking to another human being. Yeah. Really, when it comes to...
Do you think sometimes people are worried about getting it wrong or saying, being offensive or that
I think
kind
a lot
of
of people are. That still plays a huge role. Yeah. But unless you make that connection, you're not going to ever know whether you are making doing the right thing or making the wrong move. If you're doing it wrong, you'll be told you do it wrong, but then that gives you the opportunity to go, okay, I know what I need to do to get it right. Yeah. So it's a learning experience both ways, and it's a two-way process. It's not a one-way street. So we both have to have our minds open and be ready to accept.
And to me, and I'm going off topic a bit, but to me that's what reconciliation is as well. Like
reconciliation, it is, and we need to. Sometimes I think we need to improve on that too.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we're just sort of skimming around the edges a little bit.
And
it's a lovely name and it's a lovely title, but it's also something that you don't do once a year and then go, okay, that's done for the year. Yeah. It's not. It's just I see it as a reminder that we need to continually do this right throughout the year in, year out.
So take a moment to think about how do you be, feel, think and do after listening to Gabby talking about connecting to community, to Aboriginal community. For me, I found it very interesting that an Aboriginal woman was saying what she was saying about connecting to community, because we sort of have this incorrect idea that, you know, one Aboriginal person will know all the other Aboriginal people in town or in the community, and it's a bit like imagining that one non-Aboriginal person will know all the other non-Aboriginal people in town. So it's just as complex a society everywhere. And we all have to build those relationships, and in early childhood services every last one of us has to build those relationships, and which is a great way to move into the book Learning on Country. This is a bit of a handbook and a guidebook for me. I go back to it regularly, and it's just got all the key sort of information about next steps, you know, people wanting to know what to do, and Sarah talked about getting permission and finding out making relationships, and a lot of that information is in this little e-book. It's fantastic. It talks about identity, yarning, connection, relationships and community mentoring, and the book's tried to capture the essential information and understandings that you'll need to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. And as I said earlier, we were talking about cultural safety earlier, and that concept is relatively new to me. I mean, I only really became aware of it a few years ago. And, you know, cultural safety is important for all of us. And cultural safety means a place where the person's identity is not denied, where it's completely accepted. And I think there's a lot of cultures that don't feel particularly safe at the moment, but I think because of our history, Aboriginal cultures feel probably the least safe of all cultures in Australia, although that's just my personal opinion. But I will read from Stan Grant's new book, Talking to My Country, a quote from page 174, and he's talking about identity and cultural safety. And here's what Stan Grant says. I'm often asked, what is identity? It's a question that defies one convenient answer. Identity is forever in flux. Yet there are those things that are essential to us, the permanence of family and the traditions of culture. Our history shapes us, and for my people there is a legacy of racism. But Indigenous identity has been especially fraught, something inherently political. I shouldn't have to explain myself at all, but in Australia we have never had that privilege. It should be enough to say that I'm a man of a Wiradjuri father and a Gamilaroi mother, a man who draws his ancestry too from white Australia. But my identity comes from navigating the space in between and having to explain to an often uncomprehending, sceptical, even hostile nation. Imagine now for a moment growing up living where it isn't safe to be who you are, or not safe to come from your own particular family or culture. What would that be like? And maybe there's some of us here at this webinar who've experienced that already. What we need to do is make our early childhood services safe for everyone, but particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. So we've covered a lot of ground this evening, and we've talked about reconciliation action plans, and how KidsMatter Ways resources can be used. And I want to finish off by actually introducing you to something new called the Cultural Competence Continuum. And when I first saw this, I was incredibly surprised. So cultural competence is not just awareness of cultural differences, but it's the ability to understand and communicate with and effectively interact with people across cultures. That's what the EYLFPLP says about cultural competence. It's not something that's black and white, that we either have or we don't have. Cultural competence is like mental health. It moves up and down that continuum. And I want you right now, while I'm speaking, to just have a look at where you think you might be on that continuum. So take a good look at your screen and read some of those words. And I want to say that we all move along the cultural competence continuum in both directions, up and down, depending on time, space, place, people. And for example, in preparing this webinar, I found myself back in cultural blindness for a while, because initially I tried to use only sort of my Western non-Indigenous mind on the material and the resources. And then I found I was going into silence. I wanted to do drawings about what I was doing. I was connecting to the heart. I was sitting around just wondering and being curious. And I was connecting to community. And when I accepted all those other ways of being, then I realised, could put the webinar together. And yeah, and so when I was looking at this particular topic, I went, oh, I've slid back down into cultural blindness. So some of you may have moved up the scale from where you were before you started the webinar. Some of you may have moved down the scale before you did the webinar. And it doesn't matter where you are on the scale. It's just what matters is next steps. So take a moment, and we're going to just have a little survey to see where do you think you are on the cultural continuum. So Sarah's going to pop that survey up for us. Be brave. Fantastic. And looking at that survey, I think when we did it as KidsMatter facilitators, we probably mostly put ourselves at cultural pre-competence as well. We've got a small percentage of cultural incapacity, which I can't remember what that is now, the definition of that. So wherever you are on that cultural continuum, you can always move forward you will move forward with time. And interestingly, often with new learning, then you move backwards again, and that's perfect. And just, you know, be courageous and keep learning. Sarah, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'm just having a look at some of the things coming up in the chat. Sorry, Rita, I got a little bit, I might stop the poll though too. And Lynn's been really brave and said, I'm in cultural blindness, but this webinar has made me rethink my attitude. And, you know, yeah, that's, and I think, I agree with you, Rita, I move up and down, it's not up and down, it's along, depending on what happens and what I learn, and every time I learn something, I might be in a different place. So yeah. I might just close the poll.
Fantastic. So, yeah, and I find this, I go back to this quite often, just read through it again and again and again, because it gives me a direction, you know, for where I'm heading as well. It gives me, you know, it gives me a way to do a self-assessment, I suppose you could call it, on where I am today. So I encourage you to do that. And encourage you to plan for change in yourselves and find out more, but also plan for developing as educators and professionals, and be prepared to have the difficult conversations with your teams about cultural competence, and then get into action. And don't stop, keep growing, keep transforming. The fact is that social and emotional well-being of children and families can't be achieved through monocultural approaches, no matter who's at your early childhood service. So in conclusion, we've got 5 minutes to go before the end of our webinar, so we're pretty much on time. To truly support mental health and well-being of all our children and families, and in particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families, we do need to start thinking deeply about where we are on the cultural competency continuum, and we need to think deeply about reconciliation, how we can get into action, and that we can think about how we might use the KidsMatter Ways resources to get us started. As I said, I encourage you to keep learning, and look out for upcoming webinars on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander resources, and look for upcoming events on reconciliation. I'm sure you'll find them, and start thinking about your reconciliation action plan. So have a think about what will be your next step toward reconciliation, And if you click on that where it says click here to answer, you can put your answer in there, or you can also put it in chat. If you follow the link, you'll put it on on the blog that's on our website. And that will open into a new tab, so you'll have to click the old tab to get back here. And while you're thinking about what your next steps are and what you might do, or your next one step, I'd like to finish by sharing the words of Aboriginal woman Miriam Rose Ungunmere Bauman. And this is what Miriam said. We have learned to speak the white man's language. We've listened to what he had to say. This learning and listening should go both ways. We would like people in Australia to take time to listen to us. We are hoping people will come closer. We keep on longing for things that we have always hoped for, respect and understanding. To be still brings peace, and it brings understanding. When we are really still in the bush, we concentrate. We are aware of the hills, of the turtles and the water lilies. Our culture is different. We are asking our fellow Australians to take time to know us, to be still and to listen to us. And now I'll hand back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Rita. Those words are so powerful, and it's a bit like that moment that where there aren't any words. For me, it's really important to experience it. But I'd really encourage, and I can see from the chat that people are really talking about this is an ongoing process. It's about talking, it's about connecting and continuing to do that. And I feel like we've gone so quickly and covered so much in a long way, but it is only one small part of the whole process, and each of us have to take individual responsibility, because this is something that's really important for all of us, for all of our children, and it's too important not to do something, and I think that's why that first step is always really, really important. So you can see here that you can access our resources, and we'd really encourage you to do that, or to connect with us in any way, and continue the conversation, to keep talking with us and with each other. So you can connect with KidsMatter in a whole range of ways, and the KidsMatter framework could really support you to not only access our resources, but continue to support the mental health and wellbeing of all children and their families. So just as we finish, I'd really like to thank everybody for their amazing chat. I'd like to thank all the KidsMatter team for supporting us with that, but particularly like to thank you, Rita, for I know this was a bit of a journey for you too, Rita, the whole process, wasn't it, about being in this space, and because it's a big responsibility, and so just really like to thank you for that, and also what a privilege it is for me to be part of this as well.
It was incredibly rewarding researching and preparing for this webinar, and as I said earlier, I couldn't have done it without the team as well.
So thanks so much, everybody. I can see lots of thank yous. So please make this the beginning of something, or the continuation of something. Don't make this the last thing, and share it with your friends. And you'll be, as I said, you'll be getting copies of the resources. So don't forget to fill in the feedback form. Put the names of all the people who you're watching with, so you can all get certificates. And as you can see from the notification there, you'll get an email with the links to recordings, and you'll be able to access that, plus all of our other great resources on the KidsMatter website. But if in doubt, just contact us. Flick us an email, or contact us via one of those other places as well. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll say goodbye now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. If you could please stay online just to complete the survey in front of your screen now. To scroll down to select the submit button, please use the scroll bar on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be leaving the room open for 10 minutes, and there'll be a timer in the top left-hand corner of your screen. And we just thank you again for your feedback.